There are names in war that belong to legend, and there are names that belong to silence. For 3 years, across the frozen fields of the Eastern Front, German soldiers whispered a title that carried more dread than any official designation. Die Weiße Tod, the White Death. They did not know her face. They did not know her name. They knew only that when the snow was still and the air was clear, death arrived without sound, without warning, without mercy. It was not until 1947, when Soviet archives began their slow thaw, that the world learned the truth behind the phantom. Her name was Sergeant Natalia Volkova, and she had been erased, not by the enemy, but by her own side. The file was discovered in a sub-basement of the Ministry of Defense in Leningrad, buried beneath requisition forms for boots and blankets. It was marked classified, indefinite hold, stamped with the red triangle reserved for cases considered too sensitive for public consumption. Inside were 127 pages, ballistics reports, interrogation transcripts, witness statements, and a single photograph of a young woman with hollow eyes and a sniper's badge pinned crookedly to her tunic. The photograph was labeled only with a number, 0419 SR, no name, no rank, no acknowledgement. But the reports told a different story. Between November 1941 and February 1944, Natalia Volkova was credited with 412 confirmed kills. More than any other female sniper in the Red Army, more than many of the men whose names were celebrated in newspapers and carved into monuments. And yet, when the war ended, she did not return home. She did not receive a medal. She simply vanished. Her family had believed her dead. Her mother, Elena Volkova, a schoolteacher in the village of Vyazma, wrote 17 letters to the War Ministry between 1945 and 1949. All were returned with the same reply. No record of service found under that name. Elena died in 1951, still believing her daughter had been killed in the initial German offensive. It was not until a former Red Army clerk named Dmitry Sokolov came forward in 1972, dying of liver cancer and unburdened by loyalty, that the first clue emerged. Sokolov had been stationed at a field headquarters near Rzhev in early 1944. He remembered Natalia, he remembered the orders, and he remembered the silence that followed. She was supposed to be a hero, Sokolov said in his deathbed interview, recorded by a researcher from Moscow State University, but she became a problem, not because of what she did to the enemy, because of what she saw us do to ourselves. Natalia Volkova was born in 1921, the third daughter of a railway engineer and a schoolteacher. She grew up in the fields outside Vyazma, learning to shoot rabbits with her father's hunting rifle before she learned to read. By the time she was 16, she could hit a moving target at 300 meters. By the time the war began, she was already a hunter. But the Red Army did not want female hunters. It wanted nurses, radio operators, clerks, women who could support the machine without threatening its mythology. Natalia applied to sniper school twice and was rejected both times. She enlisted as a medic instead, stationed with the 34th Rifle Division near Smolensk. It was during the siege of Smolensk, in the brutal autumn of 1941, that everything changed. Her unit was pinned down by German machine gun fire in a ruined factory complex. 3 officers were dead. The radio operator had been shot through the throat. Natalia crawled through the rubble, retrieved a fallen sniper's Mosin Nagant rifle, and spent the next 6 hours eliminating the enemy position, one shot at a time. By nightfall, the Germans had withdrawn. By morning, Natalia had been transferred to the 2nd Sniper Battalion and given a rifle with her name scratched into the stock. She never worked as a medic again. Her superiors did not know what to do with her. She was too effective to dismiss, too dangerous to celebrate. Female snipers existed in the Red Army. Lyudmila Pavlichenko had already become a symbol of Soviet strength, but Natalia was different. She did not smile for photographs. She did not give speeches. She did not write letters to Stalin praising the glory of the motherland. She simply killed, with a precision that bordered on the mechanical and a silence that unnerved even her own comrades. One report from her commanding officer, Captain Ilya Reznik, described her as a soldier of exceptional skill and troubling detachment. Another, written 3 months later, used a different word: dangerous. The Germans learned her nickname first. It began as a rumor among infantry units stationed near Velikie Luki in the winter of 1942. Soldiers spoke of a sniper who operated alone, who never missed, who seemed to appear and disappear like smoke. They called her Die Weiße Tod because she hunted in the snow, dressed in white, invisible, until the bullet had already been fired. German officers dismissed it as superstition until the bodies started piling up. Officers, radio operators, forward observers, all killed with a single shot to the head or chest, often from distances exceeding 600 meters. By the spring of 1943, German intelligence had issued a standing bounty, 5,000 Reichsmarks, for information leading to the capture or confirmed death of the sniper known as the White Death. They never collected, but the Red Army was watching too. Natalia's kill count rose, and with it whispers of something darker. She had begun refusing certain orders. She had been seen arguing with political officers. She had stopped attending mandatory party meetings. And then, in January 1944, during the liberation of a village near Vitebsk, she witnessed something that would seal her fate. A Soviet penal battalion, convicts and deserters pressed back into service, had been ordered to clear a mined road. They were unarmed. They were told to walk forward until the mines detonated. Natalia watched from a ridge as 23 men were blown apart to clear a path for tanks. She filed a formal complaint. 3 days later, her file was marked classified, indefinite hold. 2 weeks after that, she disappeared. The official report stated that Sergeant Natalia Volkova had been killed in action during a reconnaissance mission near the Dnieper River on February 14, 1944. No body was recovered. No witnesses came forward. Her rifle was returned to the armory, her belongings were burned, and her name was removed from all active duty rosters. For 30 years, the Soviet Union maintained that she had never existed beyond a minor footnote in a forgotten regiment. But the truth, buried in those 127 pages, told a different story. Natalia Volkova had not been killed by the Germans. She had been silenced by her own army because she had seen too much, said too much, and refused to become the kind of hero the state required. Now I invite you to leave in the comments where you are watching from and the exact time you are hearing this story. We are interested to know how far and at what moments of the day or night these documented accounts reach. The Mosin-Nagant model, 1891-30, was not a weapon designed for elegance. It was a tool forged for endurance, for cold, for mud, for the kind of war where beauty was a luxury no one could afford. The rifle weighed just over 4 kilograms, measured 23 meters in length, and fired a 7.62 TAC 54 mm cartridge capable of punching through a steel helmet at 800 meters. It was reliable, brutal, and unforgiving, qualities that mirrored the war itself. For Natalia Volkova, it became an extension of her body, a second heartbeat synchronized with her breath. The rifle she carried from 1941 to 1944 bore the serial number R472, scratched into the stock along with her initials, NV. When she disappeared, the rifle was returned to the armory at Smolensk. It was logged, cleaned, and reissued to another sniper, but the initials were never erased. Training for Soviet snipers in 1941 was a matter of survival, not ceremony. There were no graduations, no formal commendations. You learned by watching, by failing, by dying. The curriculum was simple: marksmanship, camouflage, fieldcraft, and the psychology of patience. Natalia excelled at all of it, but it was the last skill, the ability to wait that made her lethal. Other snipers grew restless after an hour, shifting their weight, adjusting their position. Natalia could remain motionless for 6 hours, breathing so shallowly that frost would not form on her veil. Her instructors noted this in her file with a mixture of admiration and unease. One wrote, "She does not hunt like a soldier. She hunts like something older." Her first confirmed kill came on November 8, 1941, near the village of Dorogobuj. A German forward observer had been directing artillery fire from the bell tower of a burned-out church. Soviet infantry had tried twice to dislodge him and failed both times, losing 11 men in the process. Natalia was given the assignment not because anyone believed she would succeed, but because no one else was willing to try. She spent 2 days studying the church from a collapsed barn 400 meters away, noting the observer's routine: when he arrived, when he ate, when he repositioned his binoculars. On the third morning, at 06:47, she fired a single shot. The observer fell backward into the bell tower, his binoculars shattering on the stone floor. The artillery stopped. Natalia did not celebrate. She reloaded, marked the kill in her logbook, and moved to the next position. The logbook itself became a point of controversy. Soviet doctrine required snipers to record every shot: target type, distance, weather conditions, and outcome. Most snipers treated it as a bureaucratic formality, scribbling vague notes in smudged pencil. Natalia treated it like a medical chart. Her entries were precise, clinical, detached. Target, officer, estimated rank lieutenant. Distance, 520 meters. Wind, 12 km/h northeast. Temperature, 18 degrees Celsius. Result, thoracic cavity penetration, immediate incapacitation. There was no emotion in the language, no satisfaction, no regret, just data. Her commanders praised her discipline. Her fellow soldiers found it disturbing. One sniper, Corporal Anton Belov, later said in an interview, "She wrote about killing the way a mechanic writes about fixing an engine, like it was just another task." But the kills were not just tasks. Each one chipped away at something inside her, something she refused to name. By the spring of 1942, Natalia had stopped speaking during meals. She stopped writing letters home. She stopped sleeping more than 3 hours a night. Her commanding officer, Captain Ilya Reznik, grew concerned and requested a psychological evaluation. The evaluator, a young military psychiatrist named Dr. Viktor Orlov, spent 2 hours with her in a field tent near Kaluga. His report, classified until 1989, was blunt. Sergeant Volkova exhibits symptoms consistent with prolonged combat stress, including emotional numbing, hypervigilance, and dissociative detachment. However, her operational effectiveness remains unimpaired. Recommendation: continue active duty with bi-weekly monitoring. The monitoring never happened. Dr. Orlov was reassigned to a field hospital in Ukraine 3 days later. Natalia returned to the line. Her reputation grew not through propaganda, but through whispers. German soldiers began leaving crude drawings in abandoned positions, stick figures of a woman in white surrounded by skulls. One captured Wehrmacht diary, recovered near Vyazma in late 1942, included an entry that read, "We do not fear the Russians, we fear her. She does not fight like a soldier, she fights like a ghost." Soviet intelligence translated the diary and forwarded it to Red Army High Command, suggesting it could be used for morale purposes. The suggestion was ignored. Natalia was too unpredictable, too independent, too unwilling to play the role of the patriotic heroine. She was useful, but she was not controllable, and in Stalin's Red Army, that was a fatal flaw. By the summer of 1943, Natalia had been transferred 4 times, not as punishment, but as containment. Each transfer was justified with bureaucratic language: tactical reassignment, operational necessity, strategic redistribution. But the real reason was always the same. She made people uncomfortable, Not because she was a woman in a combat role, the Red Army had thousands of female combatants by then, but because she did not conform to the narrative. She did not smile for photographers. She did not give interviews to war correspondents. She did not attend political lectures or recite slogans about the glory of the Soviet state. She simply killed, efficiently and without ceremony, and then disappeared back into the snow. Her fellow snipers respected her, but they did not befriend her. Corporal Belov, who served alongside her for 6 months, described her as a shadow with a rifle. Another sniper, Sergeant Larisa Kovalenko, said, "She was the best shot I ever saw, but she scared me more than the Germans did." The fear was not of her skill, but of her silence. In a war where soldiers clung to camaraderie as a lifeline, Natalia existed in isolation. She ate alone, she slept alone, she operated alone, and when she killed, she did so without hesitation, without doubt, without the emotional exhaust that kept other soldiers human. But there were cracks, small ones, invisible to most, but present nonetheless. In her logbook, buried among the clinical kill reports, there were occasional deviations. A sentence that did not belong, a question that had no answer. How many before it stops meaning anything? Do they have families who wait like mine? When does the rifle become heavier than the body? These entries were rare, perhaps a dozen across 3 years, but they revealed something the Red Army could not tolerate: doubt. A sniper who doubted was a sniper who hesitated, and hesitation in war was death. The breaking point came in January 1944, near the village of Kolmi. Natalia had been assigned to provide overwatch for a Red Army advance. From her position on a hillside, she watched as a penal battalion, men convicted of desertion, cowardice, or political crimes, was ordered to clear a minefield by walking across it. No equipment, no training, just orders. She counted 23 men. By the time the tanks rolled through, 7 were still alive. Natalia did not fire a single shot that day. She descended from her position, walked past her commanding officer without saluting, and filed a formal complaint with the divisional political commissar. The complaint was 13 pages long, typed on a salvaged German typewriter, and documented not just the minefield incident, but a pattern of what she called systematic expenditure of penal conscripts for operational convenience. She demanded an investigation. She demanded accountability. She demanded justice. 3 days later, her file was sealed. 2 weeks after that, she was gone. The rifle tells stories the mouth cannot. When R-4712 was returned to the Smolensk armory, it bore more than just scratches and wear. The barrel showed signs of over 400 rounds fired, an extraordinary number for a sniper rifle, where each shot was supposed to be deliberate, spaced, irreplaceable. The stock had been recarved 3 times, indicating repairs made in the field without proper tools. And along the underside of the forestock, hidden beneath layers of cosmoline and grime, someone had etched a single word in Cyrillic: "Prosti," forgive. No one knows who carved it, no one knows when, but the rifle, like the woman who carried it, had become a bearer of silence, and silence, in the end, speaks louder than any report ever could. Winter on the Eastern Front was not a season, it was a sentence. Temperatures fell to -40 degrees Celsius, turning the battlefield into a frozen purgatory where metal froze to skin and breath crystallized in the air like shattered glass. For the soldiers of both armies, survival became a greater enemy than bullets. Frostbite claimed more limbs than shrapnel. Hypothermia killed more men than artillery. And in that white, merciless expanse, Natalia Volkova became something the Germans could not categorize. A predator adapted to the cold, a hunter who thrived where others merely endured. The snow was not her enemy. It was her collaborator. Her hunting grounds spanned the frozen steppe between Smolensk and Vitebsk, a region the Red Army called the Meat Grinder and the Wehrmacht called the White Hell. It was a place where villages had been burned to ash, where roads disappeared beneath drifts taller than a man, where the only landmarks were the skeletal remains of tanks and the crosses of unmarked graves. Natalia moved through this landscape like a ghost, alone, self-sufficient, invisible. She carried no more than 12 kilograms of equipment. Her rifle, 30 rounds of ammunition, a canteen, a small tin of lard, and a blanket fashioned from parachute silk and rabbit pelts. She slept in abandoned barns, in collapsed cellars, in dugouts scraped into the frozen earth. She spoke to no one for days at a time. And when she killed, she left no evidence, no shell casings, no tracks, no witnesses. Her method was surgical. Unlike other snipers who operated in pairs or small teams, Natalia worked alone, rejecting the Soviet doctrine of spotter-assisted engagements. She believed that two bodies created twice the heat signature, twice the noise, twice the risk. Her commanding officers argued she ignored them, and because her results were undeniable, they stopped arguing. Her process was ritualistic in its precision, reconnaissance for 2 to 3 days, studying enemy patterns, mapping firing lanes, identifying high-value targets, then positioning, always downwind, always with multiple escape routes, always in locations deemed impassable or abandoned, and finally, the shot. One bullet, one target, then silence and disappearance. Her targets were chosen with cold calculation. She did not hunt common infantry. She hunted the men who made the war function, officers directing troop movements, radio operators coordinating artillery strikes, forward observers calling in air support, engineers repairing supply lines. Each kill was a fracture in the enemy's operational capacity. A small crack that multiplied across hundreds of engagements became a chasm. German after-action reports from the Rzew Wjazma salient in 1942 and 1943 repeatedly mentioned disruptions caused by sniper interference of unusual consistency and targeting sophistication. One Wehrmacht intelligence summary, dated March 1943, noted, "Enemy sniper activity in Sector 7 has resulted in 17 officer casualties in 6 weeks. Standard countermeasures ineffective. Recommend sector-wide sniper deployment and increased use of armored observation posts." But armor could not stop her. In April 1943, near the town of Dukovщina, a German panzer commander named Hauptmann Klaus Richter established a forward observation post inside a destroyed Soviet bunker, protected by 2 meters of reinforced concrete and a steel observation slit barely 15 centimeters wide. Richter believed himself invulnerable. He was wrong. Natalia studied the bunker for 4 days, noting the pattern of light that flickered through the slit when Richter used his binoculars. On the 5th morning at 7:22, she fired a single shot from 680 meters. The bullet entered the observation slit at a downward angle, ricocheted off the interior wall, and struck Richter in the base of the skull. He died instantly. The bunker was abandoned by noon. Natalia's logbook entry for that day read, "Target, armored OP, command element, distance 680 meters. Conditions, clear wind 8 km/h west, result indirect penetration, terminal effect achieved, site abandoned." The Germans responded with escalating desperation. Bounties were increased, counter-sniper teams were deployed, orders were issued prohibiting officers from approaching forward positions during daylight hours. None of it worked. Natalia adapted faster than they could react. When they deployed counter-snipers, she hunted them first. When they installed armored observation posts, she waited for moments of vulnerability. Door openings, supply deliveries, shift changes. When they enforced light discipline, she shifted her operations to twilight, exploiting the narrow window when visibility favored her training and patience. By the winter of 1943, German soldiers in her operational area had begun refusing promotions to officer rank. The risk had become unacceptable, but the killing took its toll. Natalia's logbook, recovered decades later, revealed a gradual erosion of emotional distance. Early entries were clinical, detached, almost mechanical. Later entries showed fractures. Target eliminated. Cannot remember his face. Cannot forget the sound. They die quietly in the snow. No one hears, no one comes. How many ghosts follow me now? These were not the words of a propaganda heroine. These were the words of someone drowning in the act of survival. And the Red Army, so eager to exploit her effectiveness, had no interest in her humanity. Her fellow soldiers noticed the change. Corporal Anton Belov, interviewed in 1978, recalled, "By late 1943, she had stopped eating with us entirely. She would take her rations and disappear into the woods. Sometimes we would hear a single shot hours later and know she had found a target. But she never spoke about it, never celebrated. It was like she was becoming the rifle." Another sniper, Sergeant Pyotr Kuznetsov, said, "I asked her once how she dealt with it, the killing, the cold, the loneliness. She looked at me like I had asked her how she dealt with breathing. She said, 'You do not deal with it. You become it or you die.' I never asked again." The psychological cost of her isolation was compounded by the nature of her work. Most soldiers killed in the chaos of battle, where adrenaline and fear blurred the moral weight of each death. Natalia killed in silence, with full awareness, with complete control. She saw their faces through her scope. She watched them breathe, laugh, smoke cigarettes, write letters, and then she ended them. There was no abstraction, no distance, no comforting narrative of heroism or necessity, just the act, repeated, refined, perfected, and the ghosts that followed. By January 1944, her kill count had reached 412 confirmed eliminations, a number that placed her among the deadliest snipers in history. But the number meant nothing to her. In her final logbook entry, dated February 9, 1944, she wrote, "The rifle grows heavier. The cold grows warmer. I do not know which is worse." 5 days later, she would witness the penal battalion being marched across the minefield. And 5 days after that, she would disappear. The Germans never found her. The bounty was never collected. Die Weiße Tod, the White Death, simply ceased to exist as if the snow had finally claimed her. But the truth was darker and far more human. Natalia Volkova had not been consumed by the enemy. She had been consumed by her own side, by a system that valued her kills but feared her conscience. The ghosts she hunted were German. The ghosts that destroyed her were Soviet. And in the end, the rifle could not save her from either. There are documents in war that change battles, and there are documents that end careers, not because they are false, but because they are true. The complaint filed by Sergeant Natalia Volkova on January 17, 1944, was 13 pages long, typed on a salvaged German Olympia typewriter and addressed to the Divisional Political Commissar of the 2nd Guards Rifle Corps. It was titled, "Report on Systematic Misuse of Penal Battalion Personnel in Violation of Red Army Field Regulations." It was precise, dispassionate, and devastating. It documented 15 separate incidents over a 4-month period in which penal battalion soldiers, men convicted of desertion, cowardice, insubordination or political crimes, had been used as human mine detectors, unarmed assault troops, and expendable forward elements in suicide missions. It included dates, locations, casualty figures, and the names of commanding officers who had issued the orders. It was the kind of document that, in a different army, might have triggered an investigation. In Stalin's Red Army, it was a death sentence. The incident that broke Natalia's silence occurred on January 14, 1944, near the village of Kolmy, 40 kilometers southwest of Vitebsk. The Red Army was advancing toward German defensive positions along a snow-covered road believed to be mined. Standard protocol required engineer units to sweep the road with mine detectors, cumbersome metal devices that resembled oversized dinner plates on broomsticks. But the engineers were delayed. The schedule was tight, and the commanding officer, Major Grigory Petrov, made a decision. he ordered the 9th Penal Battalion, 23 men, unarmed, dressed in standard infantry uniforms, to walk the road until the mines detonated. Natalia watched from an elevated position 320 meters to the east. She had been assigned to provide overwatch for the advance, to eliminate any German snipers or forward observers who might interfere with the operation. She was not prepared for what she saw. The first mine detonated at 09:14. A soldier named Private Alexei Volkov, 22 years old, convicted of falling asleep on guard duty, stepped on a Teller anti-tank mine buried just beneath the snow. The explosion was instantaneous. Volkov's body was thrown 11 meters into the air, disintegrating mid-flight into fragments of bone, cloth, and frozen tissue. The sound echoed across the valley like thunder. The remaining 22 men froze. Major Petrov, standing behind a half-track 200 meters to the rear, shouted through a megaphone, "Continue forward, that is an order." The men did not move. Petrov repeated the order. When they still did not move, he ordered a political officer, Lieutenant Vasily Orlov, to fire a warning shot over their heads. The shot was fired. The men began walking. By 10:47, 7 men were dead. 16 had survived, reaching the end of the minefield and collapsing into the snow, trembling, vomiting, weeping. The tanks rolled through. The advance continued. Natalia descended from her position, walked past Major Petrov without saluting, and returned to the field headquarters. She did not speak. She did not eat. She sat at a salvage desk in a frozen supply tent and began typing. She typed for 11 hours, stopping only to refill the ribbon and to consult her personal notes. When she finished, it was past midnight. She sealed the complaint in a waterproof pouch, addressed it to Divisional Commissar Yegor Malenkov, and handed it to the duty courier. Then she went to sleep. She did not know she had just signed her own erasure. The complaint reached Malenkov's desk on January 19th, 1944. He read it twice, once quickly and once slowly, making notes in the margins with a red pencil. Then he forwarded it to Major General Ivan Kovalev, the Corps commander, with a brief cover note. "This requires immediate attention. Recommend disciplinary review of all parties involved." Kovalev read the complaint that evening. He did not sleep that night. The next morning he convened a closed meeting with Malenkov, Major Petrov, and the head of military intelligence for the sector, Colonel Dmitry Sokolov. The meeting lasted 3 hours. No transcript was made, no official record exists. But 3 days later, Natalia's personnel file was sealed, stamped classified, indefinite hold, and removed from active duty rosters. Her rifle was confiscated. Her logbook was confiscated. Her personal effects were packed into a canvas bag and stored in a warehouse in Smolensk. And Natalia herself was transferred to a special assignment under the authority of the NKVD, the Soviet secret police. The transfer order, declassified in 1991, was a masterpiece of bureaucratic obfuscation. It stated that Sergeant Natalia Volkova was being reassigned to reconnaissance operations of strategic importance under the supervision of NKVD Captain Boris Rykov. The order was signed by General Kovalev and countersigned by Commissar Malenkov. It included no details about the nature of the assignment, the location, or the expected duration. It was, in essence, a blank page upon which any outcome could be written. And the outcome, as far as the official record was concerned, was death. On February 14th, 1944, a report was filed stating that Sergeant Natalia Volkova had been killed in action during a reconnaissance mission near the Dnieper River. No body was recovered, no witnesses came forward, no funeral was held. She simply ceased to exist. But the truth was more complex and far more chilling. According to testimony provided by former NKVD clerk Dmitry Sokolov in 1972, dying of cancer and no longer bound by fear, Natalia was never sent to the Dnieper. She was taken to a detention facility near Minsk, a converted monastery that served as a holding center for politically unreliable personnel. She was not charged with a crime. She was not interrogated. She was simply held in isolation, while her fate was debated by men who had never met her and never would. Sokolov, who processed her intake paperwork, described her as silent, composed, and utterly detached, as if she had already accepted what was coming. He also noted that she carried no personal belongings except a single photograph, folded and worn, of a young woman and an older man standing in front of a wooden house, her mother and father. She was allowed to keep it. The decision to erase her was not made lightly. The Red Army had invested significant resources in her training. She was, by any measure, an exceptional asset, but she had become a liability. Her complaint had exposed a practice that, while unofficial, was widespread and considered necessary by many commanders. Penal battalions were expendable. That was their function. To question their use was to question the efficiency of the entire military apparatus. And Natalia had not just questioned it, she had documented it, formalized it, made it impossible to ignore. Worse, she had done so in writing, creating a permanent record that could be used against the officers involved, against the command structure, even against the state itself. The complaint could not be allowed to stand, and neither could its author. The final decision was made by General Kovalev on February 10th, 1944. According to Sokolov, Kovalev justified the decision in pragmatic terms. She is a hero to the enemy and a problem to us. We cannot execute her. That would create a martyr. We cannot release her. That would validate her accusations. We cannot acknowledge her. That would require us to investigate ourselves. So we do the only thing we can. We forget her. And so they did. Natalia Volkova was removed from all records. Her file was sealed, and the official story was written. Killed in action, no body recovered, no further details available. But erasing a person is harder than erasing a file. Memories linger. Whispers persist. The soldiers who had served with Natalia did not forget her. The Germans who had feared her did not forget her, and the rifle, returned to the armory with her initials still scratched into the stock, did not forget her either. In the decades that followed, her name would surface occasionally, in veteran reunions, in declassified intelligence reports, in the margins of historical research. Each time it was dismissed as rumor, as myth, as the kind of wartime legend that grows in the absence of facts. But the complaint remained, buried but not destroyed, forgotten but not erased. And in 1989, when the Soviet Union began its final collapse and archives were opened to researchers for the first time, the complaint was found. 13 pages, typed on a German typewriter, detailing atrocities committed not by the enemy, but by the state. It was published in a small academic journal, read by fewer than 300 people, and then forgotten again. But it existed, and existence in the end is the only memorial that matters. If this story surprised you, leave a like to help the channel. Before she was a sniper, before she was a ghost, before she was erased, Natalia Volkova was a daughter. She was born on March 12, 1921, in the village of Vyazma, a small railway town in western Russia, where the winters were long and the summers were brief, and the rhythm of life was dictated by the arrival and departure of trains. Her father, Viktor Volkov, was a railway engineer, a man of precision, discipline, and quiet competence, who maintained the locomotives that carried grain, coal, and passengers across the vastness of the Soviet interior. Her mother, Elena Volkova, was a schoolteacher who taught literature and history to children who would grow up to fight in wars their textbooks had not yet written. Natalia was the third of 4 daughters. She was not the prettiest. She was not the most sociable. But she was, by all accounts, the most stubborn. Her childhood was unremarkable in the way that all childhoods in rural Soviet Russia were unremarkable, shaped by scarcity, defined by labor, punctuated by small joys that glowed brighter for their rarity. She helped her mother in the garden, tending to potatoes and cabbage. She helped her father in the workshop, handing him tools whose names she learned before she learned the alphabet. And she learned to shoot. Viktor Volkov had inherited a hunting rifle from his own father, a bolt-action Berdan model 1870, old even by the standards of the 1920s, but functional. He used it to hunt rabbits and foxes in the fields beyond the village, supplementing the family's diet with meat that could not be bought in stores. When Natalia was 8 years old, she asked if she could come with him. He refused. She asked again. He refused again. She asked a third time, and he relented. The first time she fired the rifle, the recoil knocked her backward into the snow. Viktor laughed, not unkindly, but with the rough affection of a man who believed that hardship was the best teacher. Natalia did not cry. She stood, brushed the snow from her coat, and asked to try again. By the time she was 12, she could hit a rabbit at 200 meters. By the time she was 16, she could track an animal through the forest by reading the disturbances in the snow, the broken twigs, the faint depressions where hooves or paws had pressed into the earth. She did not hunt for sport. She hunted because it was necessary, because her family needed the meat, because the skill gave her a sense of competence in a world that offered few opportunities for girls to feel competent. Her mother tried to steer her toward more traditional paths. Elena encouraged her to read, to write, to consider a future as a teacher or a clerk, stable professions that did not require physical strength or risk. Natalia resisted. She was not interested in books about distant places. She was interested in the field, in the forest, in the tangible reality of survival. Her sisters, Oksana, Irina, and Svetlana, adapted more easily to their mother's expectations. They learned to sew, to cook, to speak politely to party officials when they visited the village. Natalia learned to reload a rifle in under 10 seconds and to estimate windage by watching the movement of grass. She was not rebellious. She was simply indifferent to the roles assigned to her, and indifference in a society built on conformity was its own form of defiance. When the war began in June 1941, Natalia was 20 years old, working as an apprentice mechanic at the Vyazma railway depot. She had applied twice to study engineering at a technical institute in Moscow and been rejected both times, not for lack of aptitude, but because the quotas for female students had already been filled. She accepted the rejection without complaint, as she accepted most disappointments, by internalizing them, converting frustration into focus. She worked 12-hour shifts repairing steam engines, her hands blackened with grease, her body aching from the physical labor. She did not complain. She did not socialize. She simply worked and hunted and waited for something she could not name. The German invasion changed everything. Vyazma, located on the main railway line between Moscow and Smolensk, became a strategic target. The town was bombed 3 times in the first 2 weeks of the war. The railway depot was destroyed. Viktor Volkov was killed in the 3rd bombing, crushed beneath a collapsing locomotive shed while trying to evacuate wounded workers. Natalia found his body 2 hours later, buried under twisted metal and burning wood. She did not scream. She did not weep. She stood in the smoke and the ash, and something inside her went silent. Her mother, Elena, collapsed into grief. Her sisters fled east with their families, joining the flood of refugees moving toward the Urals. Natalia stayed. She buried her father in a shallow grave at the edge of the village, marked it with a wooden cross, and walked to the nearest Red Army recruitment office. She told the officer she wanted to be a sniper. He laughed. She repeated herself. He stopped laughing and told her that women could serve as medics, radio operators, or clerks, but not as snipers. She asked why. He said it was not a question of capability, but of policy. She asked to see the policy in writing. He grew irritated and told her to leave. She left. She walked to a second recruitment office in a neighboring town and repeated her request. She was rejected again. She tried a 3rd time, a 4th time. On the 5th attempt, At a field recruitment station near Smolensk, she was accepted, not as a sniper, but as a medic. She took the position. She knew that war created opportunities for those willing to wait. Her transformation from medic to sniper occurred during the siege of Smolensk in the brutal autumn of 1941. Her unit, the 34th Rifle Division, was pinned down by German machine gun fire in a ruined factory complex. 3 officers were dead. The radio operator had been shot through the throat. The remaining soldiers were trapped, unable to advance or retreat, slowly being picked apart by enemy fire. Natalia was crouched behind a collapsed wall, tending to a soldier whose leg had been shattered by shrapnel, when she saw the sniper's rifle lying in the rubble beside a dead sergeant. The sergeant's name had been Yuri Petrov. She did not know him, but she knew the rifle. She picked it up, checked the magazine, and crawled through the debris toward the factory's shattered windows. For the next 6 hours, she eliminated the German machine gun positions one by one. She did not hesitate. She did not miss. She simply fired, reloaded, repositioned, and fired again. By nightfall, the Germans had withdrawn. By morning, Natalia had been transferred to the 2nd Sniper Battalion and given a rifle with her name scratched into the stock. Her commanding officer, Captain Ilya Resnik, asked her where she had learned to shoot. She said her father had taught her. He asked why she had not mentioned her skill during recruitment. She said no one had asked. He did not know what to make of her. Few people ever did. But skill alone did not explain what Natalia became. Many soldiers could shoot, few could hunt. The difference was not technical, it was psychological. Hunting required patience, observation, and the ability to suppress instinct in favor of calculation. It required the willingness to wait for hours in discomfort, to ignore hunger and cold and fear, to remain focused on a single objective, even when every fiber of the body demanded action. Natalia had learned these skills in the fields outside Vyazma, tracking rabbits and foxes with her father's old rifle. She adapted them to war without difficulty, without trauma, without the emotional dissonance that crippled so many other soldiers. She did not see her targets as men. She saw them as problems to be solved, and she solved them with the same methodical precision she had once used to repair steam engines. Her family never knew what she had become. Elena Volkova, still living in the ruins of Vyazma, wrote 17 letters to the War Ministry between 1945 and 1949, asking for information about her daughter. All were returned with the same reply: no record of service found under that name. Elena died in 1951, believing Natalia had been killed in the initial German offensive. Her sisters, scattered across the Soviet Union, did not speak of her. It was easier to believe she had died a hero than to confront the possibility that she had been forgotten. The photograph she carried, the one Dmitry Sokolov mentioned in his testimony, was the only connection to the person she had been. A young woman and an older man, standing in front of a wooden house, smiling in the way people smile when they believe the future will be kinder than the past. The photograph had been taken in 1938, 3 years before the war, when Natalia was 17 and still believed that competence would be rewarded, that hard work would lead to opportunity, that the world made sense. By 1944, she no longer believed any of those things, but she kept the photograph anyway, folded and worn, because it was proof that she had once been something other than a rifle and a number. If this story surprised you, leave a like to help the channel. There are wars that end with treaties, and there are wars that end with silence. The Great Patriotic War ended on May 9, 1945, with the unconditional surrender of the Wehrmacht and the raising of the Soviet flag over the Reichstag in Berlin. Parades were held, medals were distributed, heroes were celebrated, but Natalia Volkova was not among them. Her name did not appear on the lists of decorated snipers. Her photograph was not printed in newspapers. Her story was not told to schoolchildren as an example of Soviet courage and sacrifice. She had been erased so thoroughly that even her absence went unnoticed. For 30 years, the world forgot her. And then, in 1972, a dying man decided to remember. Dmitry Sokolov was 73 years old when he was diagnosed with liver cancer. He had been a clerk in the NKVD during the war, processing intake paperwork for detainees classified as politically unreliable personnel. After the war, he worked as an accountant for a textile factory in Minsk, living quietly, speaking rarely, carrying the weight of what he had seen in silence. But cancer has a way of loosening the grip of fear. As the disease ate through his body, Sokolov decided that he would not die with the secrets intact. He contacted a researcher from Moscow State University, a young historian named Vera Kuznetsova, who was studying the use of penal battalions during the war, and offered to speak. The interview was conducted in Sokolov's apartment over the course of 3 days and recorded on a reel-to-reel tape machine. It was never officially published, but copies circulated quietly among researchers who understood that some truths could only be told in whispers. Sokolov's testimony was fragmentary, clouded by time and illness, but the core details were clear. He remembered Natalia Volkova. He remembered processing her intake paperwork at a detention facility near Minsk in late January 1944. He remembered that she had been transferred under NKVD authority, that she had not been charged with a crime, and that she had been held in isolation while her fate was debated by officers he never met. He remembered that she carried a single photograph, folded and worn, of a young woman and an older man. And he remembered that on February 18, 1944, she was removed from the facility in the early morning, accompanied by 2 NKVD guards, and that he never saw her again. When Kuznetsova asked what happened to her, Sokolov said only, "We did not record outcomes. We recorded transfers. Where she went after that, I do not know, but I know she did not come back." The interview was explosive, but it reached almost no one. Kuznetsova's dissertation, completed in 1974, included a brief mention of Sokolov's testimony, but the Soviet censors redacted the section before publication. The original tapes were confiscated by the KGB and classified as material detrimental to state interests. Kuznetsova was warned not to pursue the subject further. She complied, abandoning her research and accepting a teaching position at a provincial university. Sokolov died in October 1972, 3 months after the interview. The story seemed destined to die with him. But history, like water, finds cracks. In 1989, as the Soviet Union began its final disintegration, archives were opened to researchers for the first time. Among the millions of documents declassified was Natalia Volkova's personnel file. 127 pages of ballistics reports, interrogation transcripts, witness statements, and a single photograph of a young woman with hollow eyes and a sniper's badge pinned crookedly to her tunic. The file was discovered by a historian named Anton Lebedev, who was researching Soviet sniper operations during the war. Lebedev recognized the significance immediately. He cross-referenced the file with German intelligence reports and found multiple references to Die Weiße Tod, the White Death, a sniper who had terrorized Wehrmacht units along the Smolensk-Vitebsk corridor between 1941 and 1944. The descriptions matched. The operational area matched. The timeline matched. Lebedev had found the ghost. His findings were published in a small academic journal in 1991 under the title The Forgotten Sniper, Natalia Volkova, and the Politics of Soviet Heroism. The article was dense, technical, and read by fewer than 300 people. But it included something no one had seen before, the full text of Natalia's 13-page complaint, typed on a German typewriter, documenting the systematic misuse of penal battalion personnel. The complaint was devastating. It detailed 15 separate incidents, named commanding officers, and provided casualty figures with the precision of a medical examiner. It was not a polemic, it was an autopsy, and it revealed, with chilling clarity, why Natalia had been erased. not because she had failed, but because she had succeeded in exposing a truth the state could not tolerate. The article sparked a brief flurry of interest among military historians and human rights activists. Lebedev was invited to speak at a conference in Moscow. A documentary filmmaker expressed interest in adapting the story, but the momentum faded quickly. The Soviet Union collapsed in 1991, and the new Russian government was more interested in moving forward than in excavating the sins of the past. Lebedev's research was archived, the documentary was never made, and Natalia Volkova, once again, slipped back into obscurity. But the rifle remembered. In 2011, a collector of Soviet military artifacts purchased a Mosin Nagant model 1891-30 at an estate sale in Smolensk. The rifle bore the serial number R472 and showed signs of extensive use: a worn barrel, a recarved stock, and a set of initials scratched into the wood: NV. The collector, a retired engineer named Sergei Mikhailov, recognized the initials from Lebedev's article. He contacted Lebedev, who confirmed the serial number matched the rifle listed in Natalia's personnel file. The rifle had survived, and with it a tangible connection to the woman who had carried it through 3 years of war. Mikhailov donated the rifle to a military museum in Moscow, where it sits today in a glass case, labeled only with a serial number and a brief description: Sniper Rifle Eastern Front, 1941-1944. There is no mention of Natalia Volkova. The museum staff say they do not have enough documentation to justify a full display. But the rifle is there, silent and waiting, in case anyone asks, and occasionally someone does. In recent years, Natalia's story has found a small audience online, shared by history enthusiasts, military bloggers, and researchers who specialize in forgotten soldiers. The name WWII has been resurrected, not as propaganda, but as a symbol of the moral cost of obedience. Natalia did not die fighting the enemy. She died fighting the system that claimed to protect her. And that distinction matters because it forces a question: how many others were erased, not for failing, but for refusing to fail quietly? Her grave, if it exists, has never been found. No marker bears her name. No monument commemorates her service. The official record still lists her as killed in action, February 14, 1944, near the Dnieper River, body not recovered. It is a lie, but it is a convenient one. And convenience, in the machinery of state, has always mattered more than truth. But lies erode, archives open, voices emerge from silence, and occasionally, against all probability, a name resurfaces, not in triumph, but in testimony. The Germans called her Die Weiße Tod, the White Death. They feared her because she was invisible, unstoppable, merciless. But the name, stripped of its mythology, reveals something simpler and more tragic. She was not death. She was a woman with a rifle, doing what she had been taught to do since childhood: hunting to survive. The difference was scale. The rabbits became soldiers, the fields became battlefields, the survival became national, but the act remained the same: aim, breathe, fire, move, and the cost remained the same: the slow erosion of everything that made the hunter human. When the rifle was returned to the Smolensk armory in February 1944, it bore more than scratches and wear. Along the underside of the forestock, hidden beneath layers of cosmoline and grime, someone had etched a single word in Cyrillic: Prosti, forgive. No one knows who carved it, no one knows when, but the word remains, preserved in wood and metal, a prayer or an apology, or an acknowledgement that some debts cannot be repaid. Today, the story of Natalia Volkova exists in fragments: a declassified file, a dying man's testimony, an academic article read by 300 people, a rifle in a museum case. There are no films about her, No statues, no commemorative stamps. She has not been rehabilitated because rehabilitation requires acknowledgement, and acknowledgement requires admitting that the erasure was unjust. But indifference is not inevitability. Every name remembered is an act of resistance. Every story told is a fracture in the silence. The war ended in 1945. The rifles were collected, the bodies were buried. The survivors returned to lives that no longer fit, but the ghosts remained. They remain still in the archives and the testimonies and the objects that outlast the people who carried them. Natalia's rifle sits in a museum in Moscow, labeled only with a serial number, waiting for someone to ask the right questions. The complaint she typed on a German typewriter is preserved in an academic journal, read by researchers who understand that some truths are too dangerous to be widely known. And her name, once erased so completely that even her mother could not find it, has been resurrected, not as propaganda, not as heroism, but as evidence. Natalia Volkova was called Die Weiße Tod by an enemy that feared her. She was called nothing by a state that used her. And she is called now by those who believe that memory matters more than convenience, that names matter more than numbers, that the disappeared deserve more than footnotes. She was not a hero. She was a hunter who became a weapon, a woman who became a ghost, a voice that was silenced but not destroyed. The war ended. The rifle was returned. The woman was forgotten. But the story remains, and that, in the end, is the only victory that matters. Subscribe to our channel to explore more archived and disturbing cases. Thank you for following the story of Natalia Volkova. See you in the next video.